Good morning, all. I was simply waiting on the cue from the audiovisual team for us to be able to start. The 23rd meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs is hereby reconvened. Today, we are having our third public hearing in relation to our inquiry into the waste management policies and initiatives of the state. I want to welcome officials and representatives of the Tobago House of Assembly, ACE Recycling, Caribbean Battery Recycling, and Green Engineering. May I invite you all to introduce yourselves? I can't say the names from where I sit, but perhaps if we can start from left to right.
I'm Dave Jacob. I'm the Managing Director of Green Engineering, and I'm here representing COPE.
Kelly Danglad, Technical Manager, Green Engineering.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Ray Sandy, Chief Administrator, Tobago House of Assembly, and I have a team with me, and they'll introduce themselves.
Good morning. I am the Administrator of the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development.
Good morning. My name is Linford Beckles. I'm the Director of the Department of the Environment under the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and the Environment, Tobago House of Assembly.
Good morning. I am Kevin Clark, the Director of Operations at ACE Recycling Limited, and also the Director of Caribbean Battery Recycling.
Morning, Madam Chairman. I'm Mrs. Tricia Clark de Freitas, Director of Finance at ACE Recycling Limited.
Yeah, good morning. Ricardo Bob, Public Health Inspector.
Good morning. I'm Jasia Ibrahim, the Project Engineer attached to the Public Health Department.
Morning. Damika Marshall, Environmental Officer attached to the Department of the Environment in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and the Environment.
Thank you all for attending this morning. Now, we will introduce ourselves. My name is Sophia Choate, and I am the chairman of this committee. I will ask other members present to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Vidya Gaidin Gopi Singh, member.
Morning, everyone. Lester Henry, member.
Good morning, everyone. Taharka Obika, member.
Ms. Samuel, who sits to my left, is the Assistant Secretary of the Secretariat from Parliament, which assists us in our work in these committees. Just as a reminder, I would like to repeat the three objectives of this inquiry. One, to examine the level of waste production in Trinidad and Tobago. Two, to assess the effectiveness of regulations and policies directed at waste management. Three, to assess the adequacy of resources and institutions associated with the management of waste. I think you all must have been warned by the Secretariat that opening statements will be sought from some of you. So if I may start with Mr. Sandy, would you do a brief opening statement, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. The Tobago House of Assembly has the responsibility for waste management, the legal responsibility, that is, for waste management on the island of Tobago. Two divisions, this responsibility is shared across two divisions. The Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and the Environment via its Environmental Department, and the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development via its department that deals with public health and waste management and so on. The waste in Tobago generally is collected by private contractors engaged by the Tobago House of Assembly and is carted to the, I'm speaking primarily about solid waste here, and it's carted to the lone authorized landfill we have in Tobago at Studley Park. That landfill is managed by the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development. With me today, I have the Director of Environment, Public Health Inspector, and the engineer of the landfill at Studley Park in Tobago. And they'll be able to answer all of your questions and queries and provide the kind of information that should be able to give you some information about waste management in Tobago and the policies and so on that guides that activity. So I want to thank you very much for inviting us, and we are here to contribute.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Sandy. May I now invite Mr. Kevin Clark to make an opening statement?
Thank you, and good morning again, Madam Chairman. As I said, my name is Kevin Clark. I'm the Director of Operations at Ace Recycling Limited. Ace Recycling Limited is a waste paper recovery facility that was established 22 years ago, in 1996, and is the largest of its kind in Trinidad and Tobago. We recycle approximately 40 million pounds of paper annually, right? The paper is collected at various locations throughout Trinidad and is brought back to our facility where it is sorted into different grades, baled into half-ton bales, loaded into containers and shipped to various mills all over the world to be used as feedstock for making recycled products. With me here is the Director of Finance, Tricia Clark, and we are both willing and happy to be here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Dan Glade.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. I'm here wearing two hats. I'm representing COPE, which is the Council of Presidents for the Environment, which is an environmental NGO, but I'm also an environmental consultant and contractor. So where I work at Green Engineering, we're a hazardous waste management company. So we would deal with a lot of hazardous materials from industry, as well as asbestos-containing materials. We do also remediation of contaminated lands. And this morning, this is what we want to highlight to the committee: volumes of hazardous materials that we encounter in our day-to-day operations, as well as concerns that we have with regard to the areas of contaminated sites, which I think also has to be covered, hopefully, in this session, and ways that we think that we can reduce the waste volumes that we are observing. Thank you.
Thank you.
To Mr. Clark? Right. You just said that you all do waste paper recovery, and annually 14 million pounds. So when this is processed, what is the actual weight you get from these 14 million pounds? And that's the first question. And the second question, when you recycle the products, you said you ship to different parts of the world. Which country is the main importer of that product? And what is the cost per ton that you get? Do you weight in is pounds or ton? And what is the cost per ton?
Morning, member. I think that I might be better able to answer that. The material that is collected is sorted into various grades. We ship about 12 to 13 different grades of paper. The country that we ship most to right now in volume is India, but we also ship to some Latin American countries. We also ship to the DR, Taiwan, Thailand, Korea, just to name a few. So the material is, if we collect, say, about 14 million pounds of paper, we recycle or we ship most of it. There's very little waste that comes out of the system. The waste that may come out of the system is plastic contamination or anything like that, but not the paper itself, because we even ship a mixed grade of paper, which is something that can't be sorted, so we ship that as a grade also. The cost per metric ton, on average, it varies from as low as $50 per metric ton to about $300 per metric ton, depending on the grade of paper, and that's US dollars.
I'm going to ask about the currency.
Yeah. We do have a local mill here in Trinidad that we supply quite a bit of material to. It's the tissue mill in the Arima Industrial Estate, and they take higher grade materials, the white, the cleaner paper, to use as feedstock in making a recycled tissue product.
That tissue product is really for industrial use?
It's for local use. It goes into, there are different types of toilet paper that you'll see on the market locally and even abroad, where the paper is a little more gray. There's recycled content in it. Our mill here doesn't have a bleaching facility, so they're unable to whiten, get the brightness of the paper. So some manufacturers use a recycled grade of tissue to make different price products. So they take more or less the clean paper, the white ledger, in their manufacturing process.
So sorry. I had a question for one of the representatives of the THA, perhaps the person representing the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development might be the best person to answer this. What is the relationship between THA and SwimCall and THA and the EMA? Is there a relationship, a working relationship of any sort?
Hi. Good morning, Madam Chairman. Currently, with SwimCall, we recently had a tire shredding exercise that we would have partnered with them. That would have been in 2016. We invited the public to drop off their tires at the Studley Park landfill, where SwimCall would have brought up their tire shredder, and we had an exercise with them for approximately a month. We also are in discussions with SwimCall pertaining to a recycling initiative, and we also, when requested, they also provide us with technical advice since the landfill was originally managed by SwimCall. With EMA, the relationship we have would be as seeking technical advice, but the relationship would be directly to environment, the Division of Environment.
Well, what I wanted to find out really was whether there was any synchronization in terms of policy towards waste management between the THA, which is handling waste management in Tobago, and any of the agencies such as the EMA or SwimCall in Trinidad. Is there any sort of synchronization in terms of policy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Department of the Environment, we definitely do have a very long-standing relationship with primarily the EMA. That relationship is defined through a memorandum of understanding, where in all matters related to the environment, particularly the Environmental Management Act, in the context of Tobago, we act for and on behalf of the Environmental Management Authority. With respect to swim call, the relationship we have is not that formal. The relationship has essentially been defined through a series of collaborative efforts that are mostly related to the commemoration of significant environmental days. With respect to wider waste management policies, the policies that are developed for the national space, those are the same policies that actually apply in the Tobago context. And of course, pursuant to those policies, a series of programs and projects come out of that. And some of those programs and projects we actually do implement in collaboration with the EMA and SwimCall. Just for example, we may know about the ICARE program that is being piloted by the Environmental Management Authority. We are collaborating with the EMA to roll out that particular initiative in the Tobago context. Similarly, there is the public sector recycling program, which is essentially being piloted by SwimCall in the national space. And again, in the Tobago context, we are coordinating that particular effort on behalf of the Solid Waste Management Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
In your presentation, I don't know, perhaps Mr. Sandy may assist us as to which member may be able to answer this or tell us something about it. So far in the inquiry, we realize that there is a problem with the disposal of derelict vehicles in Trinidad. Is there a division of the THA that deals with derelict vehicles? And if so, how do you deal with it?
There's a collaboration between the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment, and with the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development. And I'll ask Mr. Bob to treat that particular issue.
Okay, Madam Chair, Chairman. Derelict vehicles fall under the purview of the Division of Health primarily in terms of its identification and removal. If we have reports or if we see derelict vehicles and they are deemed to be such as we would recognize under the Act, then we would we will try to make contact with the owners so that we could have them removed. Notice is given and a time frame. If it's not done, we also have the facility to remove the vehicles to Studley Park and where they are disposed.
Is there any special method of disposal for vehicles as opposed to any other kind of waste?
What we do is, as with any other waste, we would put them in the cell, we would crush and cover.
You said that if the owner of the vehicle does not remove it, THA removes it? That's what you said?
Yes.
Is there a cost that the owner has to pay, or is it that you do it and you incur that cost?
There's no cost at this point in time.
And is there any intention of at least letting the owner know that the cost will be levied?
User fees are in the process of being determined.
You are trying to figure out what might be the user fee, how much?
Well, that is under discussion at this point in time. So,
follow-up question regarding the outcome, the output. So, after the vehicles are crushed, is the waste monetized, or is what happens, or it rests at the landfill at Studley Park?
Member, could you repeat the question, please?
After the vehicles are crushed and compacted, what use is put to it? Will it rest at Studley Park, or is it sold? Is it cannibalized, etc., etc.?
They rest at Studley Park.
I might want to also add here that there's an informal recycling that takes place at Studley Park through the, I don't want to call them scavengers, but through the entrepreneurs who see the benefit of doing so. And there's an active trade taking place with respect to persons going at Sully Park, taking out the metal components and so on, and selling them on the scrapyard, in the scrap metal market, I could say. It's a very informal arrangement. But we do facilitate them at Sully Park.
Okay, so Mr. Sandy, will you be able to indicate how many of the, not the smaller guys, not the individual operators, but the scrap metal business dealers are there that probably may export or send the scrap metal in larger quantities in Tobago?
I don't know if a study has been done, but I know of a number of persons who are engaged in that trade, and the scrap metal is sent to larger facilities into Trinidad. So on a nightly basis in the port, you see trucks loaded with scrap metal being transported to Trinidad.
Yes. Morning, everyone, again. I'm interested in the issue of the single-use styrofoam products. I see in your submission here, you talked about your limited ability to make law to ban the use of it, since this THA is not a lawmaking body. And you also talked about the expense of it, that the biodegradable replacements are much more expensive because of the duties on it. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Right. Thank you very much, member. With respect to the price differential between the styrofoam containers and those containers that are made from biodegradable material, there's a very clear, there's a very wide, at this point, a very wide price differential. And while many factors might actually influence the price differential, one of the key factors clearly is the tariff structure and so on. As I indicated in the submissions, at this particular point, there are no taxes on styrofoam products coming into Trinidad and Tobago. However, you have taxes that are levied on environmentally friendly alternatives to styrofoam coming into the country.
Okay, good. That's a good point.
Clearly, this does not really align with our environmental ideals. So there is clearly a need. There's clearly a need for that particular situation to be addressed. And one of the ways that it could be addressed is through legislation, through upgrade of policy and that kind of thing. And at this particular point, given the constitutional arrangements and so on, the existing constitutional arrangement between Trinidad and Tobago, we at the Tobago House of Assembly, we don't really have the legislative clout to make some of those kinds of changes. So it is incumbent upon us, and we have been doing this, it is incumbent on us to make structured appeals to our counterparts in Trinidad to assist us in this particular initiative.
Okay. So I sense that there's a willingness to move in that direction on the part of your division or
yes. So yes, there's a willingness, of course, but not just willingness. I mean, we are taking very active steps to phase out styrofoam. I mean, legislation is one way we can actually do it. However, given the situation at present, we are working with the private sector to phase out styrofoam on a voluntary basis. Okay. At present, we have the Castara Tourism Development Association, for example. I mean, Castara is a rural village in Tobago where the socio-economic survival is largely based on tourism. And we are working with those, with the stakeholders in that particular community, essentially to make Castara the very first styrofoam-free village in all of Trinidad and Tobago. All right, and efforts in that regard are very much underway. We are also working with a couple of business associations, primarily the Crown Point Community Partnership Association in the Crown Point area. For those of us who would normally visit Tobago from time to time, you know that Crown Point is quite active and so on in terms of recreation and restaurants and so on. We are currently working with them to make Crown Point a much greener area. We expect in a few weeks, on the occasion of World Environment Day, a couple of the businesses are actually going to totally phase out the use of styrofoam. So we are working with them and having them assisting us to promote the alternatives and so on. So those private businesses are actually going to be our champions in this particular initiative.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, you want? Well, I want to congratulate you on the not only on your willingness, because it seems to me that it's more than that. You're being very proactive in trying to change the policy. So that certainly is highly commendable. What I wanted to ask is this. I read somewhere that for landfills, and it seems to me as though all the waste in Tobago goes to Studley Park, for landfills to be considered safety compliant, for want of a better phrase, you must be able to cover the waste with at least 6 inches of dirt. Is that happening at Studley Park?
Hi. Madam Chairman, that we cover our waste daily. Where we would receive the material from primarily, we have a lot of agricultural vehicles that will come into the landfill and dispose of soil. We also do from excavations and that sort of thing. So we have, I guess, a stockpile of material that we can use to cover the waste. So that is being done.
Well, it's not simply covering it. It's doing it in such a way that it meets a certain standard. That is really what I'm interested in, because I know that landfills in Trinidad have difficulty meeting that standard. So what I wanted to find out was whether there was such a difficulty or a similar difficulty in Tobago.
The workers at Studley Park, they are very efficient at what they do. They've also been there for a number of years, and we don't have such of a difficulty. It's something that they do on a daily basis, and we usually have the enough material to cover.
Madam Chair, can I also add that Studley Park landfill is located right next door to the Studley Park quarry. Quarrying activities require us to remove the overburden. Studley Park requires the overburden to cover the material taken to the landfill. So we have a symbiotic relationship with Studley Park quarry and Studley Park landfill. So as the officer indicated, there's adequate material to cover the landfill at Studley Park.
Thank you. Yeah. There was, in your submission to us, you said that solid waste was disposed of by using engineered cells. For people with no scientific background like myself, could somebody explain what that means?
Okay, the engineered cell, it is a cell that they would construct similar to a container. It looks like a container in a sense. It is usually lined with a material known as polythene, which would prevent any liquid from going into the soil, groundwater. That's in the initial stage of preparation. And we have pipes that are laid to collect leachate, also pipes that are used to vent the methane gas before the garbage is deposited in that area. That is how the cell starts. And then we start to put the domestic waste, and then it's covered on a daily basis, and the process will continue. So engineered, meaning that environmentally sound, minimal damage to the environment in terms of the leachate getting into, primarily the leachate, getting into the soil and the groundwater and venting of the gas.
Madam Madam Chair, if I may also include here, Tobago is pretty lucky in that they have a manageable situation there. They have landfill cover material next door. They could afford to construct an engineer's shell like she described. However, here in Trinidad, it is not quite the same. We do hazardous waste management, and we practice a technique called co-disposal in Trinidad here, which means we dispose of both hazardous and non-hazardous waste at the same landfill. We should be adopting that same technique, the engineered cell. We do it here in another way. We have at Forest Park in particular, we have a clay-lined landfill. It doesn't require that we use a polythene sheet lining to create the cell. So we use the natural clay lining, which resists migration of waste from the deposit. Yeah. So that's another engineered type of cell. We do not have the capacity here, I use that word guarded, to construct venting pipes, etc. I think the sheer scale of the operations at the Beetham in particular and Forest Park, it's difficult to get that type of engineering into the cells here in Trinidad. The problem probably stems from the fact that there's no tip-in fee for swim call to operate these cells the way they should. So we have our challenges here in Trinidad. But hats off to the guys in Tobago.
Thank you, Dr. Henry.
Yes, this issue that I didn't see it reflected in the submission or in the questions, but I wanted to know, is there any issue of waste ending up in the beaches and so on in Tobago? Is that a problem, or is something that you don't have to deal with? And if so, what type of waste?
Remember, while in Tobago, we pride ourselves on trying to be very good environmental stewards. We are not always that way. And just like any other small island developing states, we do have challenges with waste ending up on our coastlines and so on. In my submission to the committee, I would have indicated to you the efforts that we make at cleaning up the coastline and so on. It's normally a very large effort once per year as part of the International Coastal Cleanup campaign. What we have noticed over the years, and this is of some concern to us, is the fact that we have had increasing participation from the public in this particular campaign. However, at the same time, there is a corresponding increase in the amount of waste that we collect. Now, we can probably make the analysis by saying that, well, maybe the fact that we have more hands on deck, it means therefore that we're in a position to collect more waste, right? Or alternatively, we could conclude that we are actually producing more waste, and more waste is actually passing through the cracks, so to speak, and finding its way to our coastline. But the issue of trash on our coastlines and so on, it's a global issue, but it's particularly a challenge for us in the smaller and developing states.
Question regarding the methane gas at Studley Park. Has any consideration been given to commercialization of the gas, capturing it as opposed to flaring it and utilizing it in industry or any other use?
I remember there was some feasibility done in relation to that, but at the moment, there are no systems in place for doing it.
The other question I have is regarding sourcing waste from residential waste at source. For example, if you go into you're in Scarborough area and you have plastic waste, you have whatever the technical terms would be, sorting it at source from the homes. Has any consideration been given to that as well? And what has been the outcome of it?
Remember, at present, that is one of the limitations that we have in terms of there is no mechanism for the separation at source. So those are some of the things that we are looking to put into the system.
I think this question might be more relevant to green engineering. From your submission, you said that over the last 10 years, you have managed contaminated soil projects. My question is, what is the main agent of contamination and the source of that contamination? And what is your estimated cost for that particular treatment of the soil?
The projects that we encountered over the last 10 years were mainly lead contaminated areas. And the contamination stemmed from the improper disposal of batteries. So in the Arima area, there used to be, in the 1970s, I believe, there was a lead smelting factory, and they would dispose of slag and other items in nearby communities. So they'll just, what we call fly tipping, they'll just go and dump the waste in these areas. So the soil became contaminated with lead. And in one case, they did a blood lead study. EMA, together with, I believe, the University of the West Indies, did a blood lead study with primary school children. And the children that had high concentrations of lead in their blood, they went to their homes to try to investigate why. And they realized that they were living in a community where they had batteries were indiscriminately disposed. So that led to the lead contamination. There was another site in Arima again, Lachan Straits, where the gentleman was doing informal battery recycling. So he would collect the batteries, smell the lead, break it open, smell the lead, and right in his yard do this battery recycling. And that led to also contamination of his soils there. And also, it also affected his children who lived on the premises. So we also remediated that site. But the main causes are improper waste disposal. So, and just wanted to make another point, as you all were talking about the end-of-life vehicles. Remember, the vehicles would have also hazardous components, right? So you have your batteries, you would have waste oil, you'll have your coolants, which would be ethylene glycol, it's organic. Some vehicles have catalysts, you have your tires. So when we have all these informal recycling, where on one hand, it's good that you have an informal market, but on the other hand, it leads to contamination of areas of soil and land, and which leads to health issues, which also then leads to costing with regard to, you'll have incidences of cancer and other diseases linked to contaminated sites. And then the cost to remediate, because the sites that we remediated, it wasn't the owners. The owners didn't have to pay. It was us, taxpayers, because EMA got involved at that point. So there's all these costs that we are, as a state, are burdened with, right? Whereas it should be the polluter pays, but in this case, it didn't happen. And even one of the sites that we remediated, the gentleman went right back and started to do his informal battery recycling again. And when we visited the site, we just dropped in. The soil is gray. You could see the lead, and then all this lead is running off into the Arima River. It's really disturbing. So
is there no way that through perhaps the Office of the Attorney General, that some sort of injunctive relief may be sought against him? Because I mean, when lead gets into the system, especially the system of a child, that affects a child's brain and life outcome at the end of the day.
In fact, his own kids had mental retardation or mental issues from ingesting or incidental ingestion of the lead from when they play in the soil. And also in the community, one of the communities in Arima, the children there were also affected with their mental capacities were affected from exposure, from lead exposure. So As to injunctions, I'm not sure if EMA would have explored that option, or I don't know if that would fall under public health, but I don't know if that was even explored. But Mr. Jacob will discuss the costs.
Typically, waste treatment and disposal, non-hazardous waste could attract a cost of probably $500 TT per cubic yard, depending on the type of waste. And hazardous waste like the lead contaminated soil could attract $5,000 per cubic yard, 10 times the cost.
Could I ask, Chair, Ms. Danglad, is Danglad or Danglade? Ms. Danglad, regarding the offending person in ARIMA, is he still engaged in this activity?
The last time I visited his home, informally, I just drove past just to see. It wasn't like a formal visit, and that was in 2014, and he was still operating. And we did a site in Guayagawari where, again, some persons recycle the lead to use as sinkers in fishing. And this is what was happening in Guayagawari. So even his animals, he kept animals, and some of his animals were affected by the lead. And unless, as Madam Chairman mentioned, if there's some type of legal injunction or some type of follow-up monitoring, they would just go back to doing what they know.
So two quick questions. You're conducting this in what capacity? These site visits you conduct, what capacity? And two, if you can send us a list of all the offending persons in the past as well, because they may have gone to another location and continue to do that. I don't want to know that my child, by virtue of just going somewhere where I live, could get some mental retardation despite my best efforts to educate her, and as well as every child in Trinidad and Tobago. So I find this is a very alarming and disturbing and frightening prospect. So if you can provide that information, and what capacity do you do this work, and if you all are properly funded, and if you need more assistance from the government?
Well, to answer your first question, the study that I mentioned before, the blood lead study that was conducted by the EMA and the University of West Indies, I believe that was Dr. Chang Ying, conducted that investigation. And through that investigation, we identified these contaminated sites, these lead-contaminated sites. And then EMA would have tendered, put the project out for tender, and we won the tender, and we worked with EMA to remediate these sites. The other site, which was contaminated by lead slag, we have two other sites.
Sorry, Secretary, we is who? You said we won the tender.
Oh, Green Engineering, sorry. Green Engineering. And the other two sites were private sites. I think the owners realized that there were contamination issues associated with the site, and they decided to remediate. So again, EMA was involved in that case as well, and we cleaned up those sites. And we realized also that we were beginning to see a trend. So we started to do an in-house study. Green Engineering did an in-house study, and we developed a preliminary contaminated land inventory for Trinidad. So we looked at sites that would have had previous industrial uses, where it would have been a battery factory, previous gas stations, previous chrome plating, because we know we are an industrialized state. And most industrialized countries, they have a contaminated land inventory. So they know in each regional corporation which lands in that regional corporation is contaminated, so that if somebody wants to purchase the land, they can say, listen, you need to remediate it to this level before you can reuse it. But what is happening now, because we don't have an inventory, we don't know which sites are contaminated, and land use changes so quickly, you have people remediating and changing use, and you're being exposed and you don't know. And another example of that was when they were building, I think, the hospital in San Fernando. While excavating, they punctured a UST, underground storage tank, which had oil in it, which was released because the site was a former gas station, and it changed use several times. They didn't remove the USD. The USD was still remain there. And then when they tried to build it for, I believe it was the hospital, they punctured the tank. So if you don't know the historical background of the land you're purchasing and what previous uses, you could be exposing yourself and your workers and your population.
No, not a question, but if this, so you're saying there's a preliminary contaminated land inventory for Trinidad, if you could just say when last was updated and when you can send it to us so that we can have some information before us.
Madam or member, sorry, that study was done 3 years ago on the behest of AmCham. We are also members of AmCham, and they asked us to do this study. It is self-funded, by the way, and we'd appreciate if there could be funding for a project like that to continue the project. So we think we are about 10 to 15% there. We suspect many more sites that are contaminated, and we are hoping to continue this study within the next couple of years, of course, with funding.
What I would like to ask is when you discover or you're asked to work or give your input on a particular site, do you liaise with any state agency? For example, do you lay a complaint with the regional corporation, or do you bring it to the attention of the district medical officer, for example?
When we reach to the site, to the point where we are remediating the site, we are there as a subcontractor. So EMA, in most cases, the EMA would be the lead, the project lead in these cases. So they would liaise with public health and the regional corporations, and we would have meetings. We would attend meetings. A couple of times we did public consultations with the community to let them know, okay, what we're doing, what we found. But usually, it would be the EMA that would lead that type of interaction and consultations. But we decided, again, remember we're wearing two hats, so we're contractors, but we're also environmentalists, and we're also scientists. So we noticed that there was a trend. So we decided to do an in-house study to try to identify if there are other sites throughout Trinidad. We are an industrialized country. So we would expect that you would have more sites. And how we approached the project was to go to the archives, the government archives, which I thought had a lot of information, and we got a telephone directory from 1950. And we looked at to see what type of companies were available and was present in 1950 and where they were located. And then we went to the ground to see okay, are these companies still there? Such as, paint manufacturers, battery manufacturers, people selling chemicals, those type of things. And most times when we would go to the site, the land use would have changed. So what would have been a battery factory is now residential housing, and that's the problem. When the land use changes, is there any decommissioning of an industrial plant? Is there any remediation before you change land use? There's another site we went to that the facility is still up. It used to be a creosote plant where they would treat timber. So they had these big tanks of creosote, which is a preservative, like a pest. It's not a pesticide, right? And they would dip timber into these big tanks of creosote to preserve the timber, which was used as electricity poles. And when the plant was closed down, they simply punctured the tanks and let all the creosote run out into the soil. But now farmers are using the soil, they're using the land. So the structures are still there, right? Because they never decommissioned the plant. So the structures are still there. And farmers are planting because it's an abandoned site, they see land, they're looking for somewhere to plant, so they start to plant. So so is the contamination now being spread to the public, to the farmers now who are tilling the soil? So it's a concern. It's a concern, and like I said, as an industrialized country, we need to have a contaminated land inventory We need to have a hazardous waste, a proper hazardous waste inventory, and an asbestos inventory, which you wanted.
But before we go there, I just want to go back to the THA to ask you, how do you dispose of your batteries, your car batteries? Sorry.
Currently, all the waste comes to the site. What we try to do is allocate specific areas so that it will be in a particular area, and with the lining and the proper use of the cell, we hope, but as anything else, you would naturally have instances where, because we don't have a proper facility to actually deal with those sort of hazardous type of waste.
Well, it seems to me that then it means that the waste is not being properly managed and disposed of, and it's just going into the soil. Because I can't imagine that polyethylene would prevent anything from soaking into the soil. Has a THA considered contracting someone to deal specifically with this kind of waste?
If I can add, Madam Chair, there are some entrepreneurs in Tobago who collect batteries and send them to Trinidad for recycling. I know of at least 3 persons in Tobago who are currently involved in that exercise. They drive around through the villages asking if anybody has batteries and so on, or you can take your batteries to them, because I do that. There's a particular gentleman in Scarborough, if I have to change a battery in my car, I take my old battery to them, and I think they pay you $5 or something like that, but I just leave my batteries there. So there are some entrepreneurs who do that. There are also entrepreneurs operating out of the landfill who will take batteries out. But of course, I'm certain that there are some that will pass through the system, might get covered by other types of garbage and so on, and might still end up in the landfill. But there are some entrepreneurs who are involved in some form of recycling of batteries in Tobago.
Well, wouldn't it simply be easier to say that the landfill will not accept batteries and direct them to these people who will send them to Trinidad?
Madam Chair, it's, the way the system operates, it's pretty difficult to get that done because the waste is commingled. So a truck will come into the landfill with kitchen waste, batteries, household waste, construction waste, and we have a difficult time in terms of sorting that to determine where it goes. So in some cases, you can call it kind of almost like fugitive waste, pass it through the system. So we do have that challenge at the landfill.
Madam Chairman, I believe that we could answer some of these questions and issues with respect to lead acid contamination, because we do have a company, Caribbean Battery Recycling Limited, and it's the only battery collection facility that is licensed by the government, by the Ministry of Trade, and certified by the EMA to collect, and OSHA, to collect lead acid batteries for export, which we export. The batteries that go to the landfill in Tobago, unfortunately, there are a lot of exporters of lead acid batteries that hide in the system by not declaring that they're exporting batteries, because you do need a license to export it. And you do have to meet certain criteria, and it's difficult to meet the criteria. So there are many yards, and I'm sure that we could provide you with some names of yards of people that are
we would be most grateful.
Draining the acid to get the lead into the ground. And in this draining process, they're not just draining the acid, but there are lead particles that also go into the ground. And we've reported some of these to the EMA in the past and to OSHA, because they make the export of the product, of course, difficult because they're not following any regulation. And some of these salvages from Tobago are also part of that, because they provide that material to these yards that are not handling it environmentally sound. So we've gone through the process. It was a tedious process. It took us years. It was the first time the EMA, since the law had been put into place, that they were also dealing with it. So it was a learning process for the EMA and ourselves, but it took us, we went through the process. It took us about 3 years to eventually get the license and to come up to scratch, to bring the facility up to scratch, to meet the EMA requirements and OSHA requirements for the handling and export of the lead acid batteries.
Ms. De Freitas, could you shed some light for the public to find out, okay, if you have a car battery, or, well, actually categorize which battery will have lead in it, and how much, what is the procedure? So if they bring the batteries to you, what happens in the exchange?
Well, when they bring the battery to us, we normally pay for the batteries. We give them something for the batteries. So there are many yards that we go to that sell lead acid.
Sorry to cut you. Will you be willing to venture how much you pay for the batteries?
It depends on the size of the battery. It goes from like $25 up to $80 for a battery, for a car battery. Some of the bigger scrap dealers that collect scrap metal, we encourage them to supply us with the batteries. Some of them do. We may pay as high as $4,000 to $5,000 a metric ton for their batteries because they're bringing it in bulk. We'll collect it. From them, bring it to our facility where it's palletized according to standards, and then we load them into containers. We line the containers, we load them into containers, and the majority of this goes to Korea, South Korea.
And where your facility is located, or facilities?
In El Socorro.
Madam Chair, if I could also include that what I think is needed is a dismantling facility for end-of-life vehicles, and that is something that I think SWIMCOL can do as part of integrated waste management approach or a waste park approach, so that you have a formal way of dismantling the vehicles, getting the batteries could then be sent to ACE to recycle, and you have a formal process and control process of dismantling a vehicle. Because when it happens I'm not sure if any of you all ever visited the Forest Park landfill site, but when you have these scavengers pulling things off of the trucks or doing their informal recycling, it happens at the side of the road. And sometimes it's piles and piles of metal you would see just as you're driving up the road. So it's not only an environmental risk, it's also a security risk. And then it also causes squatting, because now they're squatting to be able to get access to the trucks first. And I know the community in Forest Park is also affected by it, but something has to be done about the scavenging in the landfill. The landfill is supposed to be secure, it's supposed to be sanitary. We can't have those activities continuing because it's an environmental impact and it's a security issue as well.
Thank you, Chair. The THA, I saw in your submission you said there are 2 roving checkers conduct random site visits at various localities. I'm just trying to figure out what does random means, how regular is random, and those 2 roving checkers, what do they check for? Is it that perhaps now as we have this exposure on lead, if perhaps one of their job spec could be to identify lead, the batteries, the job at those sites? So the question is, what do they look for, these roving checkers?
Remember, the roving checkers, they are checking to see whether the system is operating efficiently in terms of these contractors collecting the garbage as they ought to, or the householders are storing them as they ought to so that the trucks can take them up. That's the main function, and it's what we call like a random sample throughout the island to ensure that the service is executed efficiently. In terms of the lead issue, that does not form part of the operations.
How often is random?
It is done daily. Daily.
Instead of you saying random, you should put daily in this.
The officers, sites are random. Yeah, but random locations, so it's not the same site every single day.
Yes. Once again, back to green engineering. I see your very first recommendation was for a centralized waste management facility at Point Lisas. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. Well, we know about lead. We learned a lot about lead this morning. But there are other hazardous materials that could really cause problems to our people and the environment here. Another one, a common one, is mercury in fluorescent tubes. Mercury is a mutagen, and it's a very serious hazard if you're looking at its exposure of children, for example, in the environment. Mercury is one, asbestos is another one. We have a lot of industrial chemicals. You're talking about the POPs and the benzenes and the acetones and the acids that are being generated daily out of places like industrial sites like Point Lisas. What we have found in the past, working with the companies there, is that one guy would have sulfuric acid to dispose of, say, and another guy would have lime to dispose of. But these guys don't work hand in hand. So we usually would take materials from both these guys and mix them together, treat them. So we decontaminate both materials using each other's waste. So we use the acid waste to decontaminate the lime, and the lime to decontaminate or neutralize, is the word, the acid. So you get a nice relationship there. But it doesn't happen just like that. We have to get in the middle of these two guys usually and literally tug and twist at these two guys to get them to agree to that type of treatment. Even when it in fact cuts the cost 50% for either of them. It's very difficult. And what we were recommending there is that perhaps the Plitdeco company who manages the estate should construct a facility that would in fact invite all these companies to deposit their waste streams at their location, have it tested there, characterized, treated, and disposed of properly. And what we have also found, is that these guys hire truckers to dispose of their waste. They prefer to pay a trucker than to pay green engineering to do the waste disposal because, as I mentioned before, it could cost anywhere between $500 and $5,000 TT per cubic yard. Of course, on our end, it would cost closer to the $5,000. On a trucker's end, it would be closer to the $500. I mean, economics will tell the generator that he could use the trucker and get away with $4,500 per cubic yard. And we have experienced that type of behavior. As I speak now, we have a state company. I don't think it's a state company. They are looking at tenders for asbestos disposal. They have one certified asbestos contractor and 3 truckers tendering for that project. Who do you think will get the project? You see, they look at cost, and well, after they say they look at the pre-qual exercise, which should in fact dismiss the other 3 truckers. But they have one certified contractor, 3 truckers, and I suspect one of the truckers will get a job. And this is asbestos, which is a serious carcinogen.
Which company is this?
You mean the state company?
Yes.
Am I allowed to?
Yes, you are.
UDCOT.
UDCOT.
Yeah.
I just would like to add, member, that sometimes what we observed in industry, they would have an activity that they would like to do quickly. So at that point, they just want the waste removed. They don't care who takes it. They don't care what happens there. They just want it removed from the site. So we're thinking, if you have a centralized waste management center, then that would remove the haste to just get rid of the waste. So they can send it to this facility. It will be stored there temporarily until they can get a certified waste manager or resource manager to deal with the material. But That's where the truckers come in. They just want somebody to take the waste and get rid of it. And sometimes they just turn a blind eye as to what happens to it. And God alone knows what happens to it. They could go dump it somewhere, which happens. That happens a lot.
Okay, could I just ask Ace Recycling, do you all deal with other kinds of batteries?
Well, we also deal with marine UPS batteries, but not the domestic household batteries. So cell tower units, those kind of batteries that Digicel would use in the cell towers. So that from TSTT. So we try to appeal to, of course, corporate enterprises to recycle environmentally sound, and some of them will do that. But just like in every other organization, there are loopholes, and everybody's looking for $1. So when the scrap person comes and say, "I'll give you $200 for this," it will go somewhere as opposed to us. But yeah, it's many different types of batteries. There are forklift batteries that we also deal with.
Is there a phenomenon of electronic waste? You know, when people toss out printers on computers and so on. And do you know how that is addressed?
Well, there is a company in South that deals with e-waste, but there's only one person that I know of, that we know of and have ever heard of, that deals with the e-waste. I know that when it goes to the landfill, the salvagers will pull out the copper and the other usable or valuable parts or components, but no.
I have a question for the THA. Just to go back to the methane point, how do you test emissions from the landfill? Is there any way that you can do that?
Currently, no, we don't test the emissions at the landfill.
Okay.
Madam Chair, the tube that you spoke about earlier, basically we just vent the cells to prevent the buildup of gas in the cells. So as the methane is produced, it's just vented, so the concentration is fairly low, and it's just vented in the atmosphere. We don't collect it and flare it or anything like that. It's just vented.
And for green engineering, you were focusing on Point Lisas. I know you spoke about different sites around the country and so on, but what about companies which deal with harmful chemicals, such as paint companies and that kind of thing? How is their waste dealt with?
We have a relationship with some of these larger manufacturers, and we found that the larger guys, especially those who have a foreign affiliate or affiliated to a foreign company, they have very robust EHS departments and professionals employed at their companies. They have no choice but to do the correct thing. That's where most of our work comes from. However, the local companies, because there is no local legislation enforcing the limited regulations we have, they tend not to even bother to institute measures that would preserve the environment and including the health of their workers, the employees. But the larger companies with foreign affiliations, yes, they work closely with us.
Okay, back to the THA with the issue of scavenging and so on. When we had the local government bodies, the boroughs and so on, a couple of weeks ago, so there was a lot of issues that were raised with contracting versus owning and so on. Do you have any similar issues in Tobago, the garbage trucks and so on, in terms of dealing with some contractors who may not be 100% above board? Do you have similar issues in Tobago, or is it that's not an issue as we've heard about this in Tunapuna, in Diego Martin, and so on. Swim Call issues the contracts to the garbage collectors, but so the regional government, the regional corporation gets the blame, but they don't have any control over the contract, for example. So when there's a problem with garbage collection, they get all the licks, but they don't control who is given the contract to pick up the garbage in the first place.
Remember, we issue contracts to the contractors, we control them, and we also monitor their activities. So we don't have the issue to which you speak to about there.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I have a question for THA regarding the Study Park landfill, Chair. Regarding in some landfills in Trinidad, they have the phenomenon of residents, landfill residents, persons living basically in the precincts of the landfill with families. Is that a challenge in Studley Park?
Remember, we have no such thing. We don't have any residents on the landfill.
Thank God for that.
Well, this is amazing. How did you avoid that?
In the past, people may have tried it, but what we did was increase security and surveillance and monitoring. And so we strongly discourage that kind of activity and behavior.
You have cameras placed there to do any, or just do manual, or you just drive up? How you do it? Do you have anything for real time then?
Manual surveillance. We don't have any cameras at this time, but we do manual surveillance, walking the site, driving the site, checking the site daily.
And this is for the THA again. How do you deal with biomedical waste?
The hospital the Scarborough Hospital has an incinerator. They would incinerate their waste, and the incinerated ash would come in a barrel. Yeah, it's placed in a container, and that comes to the Studley Park landfill. We have a particular area that is assigned to sensitive and hazardous waste. The incinerated ash would be placed in that particular area and covered.
One follow-up question. Do you have any education campaign so to educate perhaps the schools, people? What is the initiative you all have?
Thank you, Member. In Tobago, over the years, what we had was a number of entities, so to speak, who were bombarding the schools with proposals to conduct public education campaigns to benefit the students. Naturally, this was something that was very overwhelming for the schools. And as a result of what I would describe as pushback from the schools, we did this sensible thing, which was really to bring all of those entities together. Entities from state agencies, entities associated with NGOs and so on. We brought all of these together, all of these entities together, and what we now have is, if you wish, a singular kind of entity and so on that would engage the schools. All right. This is something that we discussed with the EMA and Swim Call recently, and they were quite impressed with the model. And they were proposing in the future, to do something similar in the Trinidad context, because they were also experiencing the same kind of pushback. Having said that, I mean, we have a couple initiatives that we have been engaging the schools on over the years. The most important being what we call the Clean School Initiative. which is, again, something that the state agencies and the NGOs collaborate on. That would have been included in the submissions. Initially, it started essentially as a kind of beautification program in the schools, but we have used that particular mechanism to engage the students on a wide range of environmental topics. The response to that has been very good. We are very encouraged by it, and we are actually adding additional components to that particular program to benefit the students.
Okay, I would just like something cleared up. It has been brought to my attention by Ms. Samuel, and this is with respect to the THA. You were telling me about how you deal with biomedical waste. In your written submission to us, this is what you had said. A proposal has been submitted to the division for the implementation of environmentally sound technology to dispose of biomedical waste from the Scarborough General Hospital. Does this mean that your current method of disposal is not environmentally sound?
The current method of incineration, I should say that it should be probably a bit more environmentally sound. A proposal is submitted that we are currently looking at to use technology that does not require incineration. So that is being revisited, which would be more environmentally sound than the current process of incineration.
I don't know. I don't follow. I don't follow what you're saying. To me, it's either that something is environmentally sound or it's not. So is there a grade that we will put on incineration? Is there a grade that is used? And if so, what grade is put on incineration of biomedical products?
It's always important, Madam Chairman, that we strive to make the system as efficient as possible. What we are doing now is acceptable, it's good, but we want to get better than that. And I think that's where the technology is looking towards, to have something better than what we have.
Well, I think what you've just said is you've told me the same thing using different words. Maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, I'm seeing it this way. Maybe other members will see it another way. But I apologize to you if it sounds as though I'm cross-examining you. That's not my intention. I'm simply trying to understand the process. And we also have people listening on the radio and looking on at the Parliament channel. So we want to break down the terms that we use to make it easily understandable. So it would seem to me that it would be fair to say that the current method of incinerating biomedical waste is not acceptable. Is that... There's no, let me reassure you, there is no harm in accepting that that is so, because if you don't accept it, then it means nobody is going to fund you to get the technology that you require, because there'll be no problem. So I urge you to say your piece now that you have the opportunity before a joint select committee of Parliament.
Madam Chairman, if I'm to suggest a response, for example, one of the things you want to do, especially in this time, is to reduce the amount of waste that goes to the landfill. So let's say one of the things that we would have mentioned in the report is carbonization. And it's a technology that we are actually researching at this point in time, where you could have a package plant that carbonizes everything in a community so that nothing goes to the landfill. So in that way, you save on landfill space and the stuff that goes, the quantity of stuff that goes there. So the new technology is to look at the fact that we may not even need to send any waste to the landfill, biomedical waste to the landfill. And it is from that perspective that we are looking at it. So it's not that incineration is unacceptable at all. But like other technologies, we are researching what could be even best in the industry.
Have you, since the EMA is a research body for the environment in general, have you had any partnerships with the EMA with respect to researching how biomedical waste should be best dealt with?
Not at this juncture that I'm aware of, not at this juncture, but it is something to be taken into consideration.
I just have two quick questions. One is a follow-up to that, and the other is regarding the material of choice in Castara. So as a follow-up to the question on the incineration of biomedical waste in Tobago, is there any opinion proffered from Green Engineering on it, if you are familiar with the case, as opposed regarding the carbonization, I guess?
I'm not familiar with the carbonization process. However, what happens in the biomedical industry is there are ways to reduce the volume or the percentage of infectious waste, which is the waste which is the really tricky waste to manage in a hospital environment. There are a couple of ways: autoclaving, microwaving, things like that. And probably this is what the THA is referring to. When you autoclave, microwave, you remove the infectious agents, and so you can treat that material like it is non-hazardous or non-biomedical. Okay, it's a biomedical waste, but non-hazardous, non-infectious. So you treat it with the normal waste stream. It reduces the waste you have to send to incinerator.
All right, thanks. The other question I have is for the THA regarding the material of preference in Castara, or materials of preference in Castara to replace the styrofoam container. So for example, if I go to a fisherman's fete, will I get a paper-based thing as you had in the green markets in Santa Cruz, or would I get something else? And what material you have, so then you can use this opportunity to listen to the national population might decide to voluntarily get on board with Castara, and probably Palatuve and Lansumi might follow suit.
Thank you very much, Member. Well, as you mentioned, paper is one alternative, but there are two other relatively popular alternatives. One is bagasse-based, and you know that many years ago we used to produce. We had a lot of bagasse here. That is not the case anymore. You know, with the decline of the sugar industry, it's a little ironic that we have to actually import the bagasse now. The other material is actually corn-based, right? Basically coming out of the United States. All right. These are the two popular materials that we actually make the alternative packaging to styrofoam from. And the containers are quite sturdy, right? They're quite sturdy, and they're actually able to contain a lot of the grease, because you know that generally in Trinidad and Tobago we tend to consume a lot of greasy food and so on. And one of the concerns that consumers will have is whether the alternatives are actually going to leak. But they actually contain the grease in the food for a very, very long time. Normally around 8 hours or so. It's quite good.
Well, the last question I have regarding that is, given the supply chain explained by ACE, all right? So the tissue factory in Arima, as well as exporting. Is there any possibility of utilizing waste from companies similar to ACE? So when you have the public sector recycling initiative, that you can have a result where you can replace the corn-based or the bagasse-based, so therefore we don't have to find additional foreign exchange to supplement the styrofoam-based thing. So that will also increase the potential for a reduced cost. Is there any opportunity to link with ACE on that?
Well, I just got familiar with Mr. Clark and so on, and we expect to exchange contact information subsequent to this particular sitting. But certainly that is something that we can explore. But if I may be so presumptuous to speak on behalf of some of my colleagues at the Ministry of Planning, I know that they are actually in the process of working with some of the corporate interests there who would normally produce styrofoam containers. They're working with them to assist them to retool their plants so that they'll be now able to manufacture some of those same containers right here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Just to go back to Ms. Danglade, I'm sorry I called you Ms. Danglade earlier. Could you just give us a brief synopsis as to what COPE is and what it does?
COPE is an environmental NGO. It operates solely on a volunteer basis and from donations from different companies. And what we do, we try to engage industry proponents to practice environmentally sound practices, the way to say it. One of the things that we did was to review EIAs. So at one point, EIAs that would be submitted to the EMA, they would also give us a copy to review and submit comments, and we would invite those proponents to meet with us to discuss the EIAs. We would give them advice as to how they can adjust it so that it's minimal impact on the environment. We do, at one point, training. We did an outdoor management course. We try to engage the communities to find out what are the issues they are having with regard to the environment. We used to do monitoring, drive around Trinidad, look for issues, and submit those comments to the EMA. So we're quite an active group. But it's an umbrella organization, and it's made up of several different environmental NGOs, but it's purely voluntary.
Okay, before I allow Mrs. Gayadeen Gopi Singh to ask a question, just a quick follow-up. What's your membership?
At this point, I cannot say. I'll need to ask our chair, Ms. Pat McGraw, as to the numbers. But I can't say offhand what the numbers are. It fluctuates.
Chair. For the THA also, I was reading again your submission, and you said over 15,000 tons of waste is collected. It includes agriculture, carcasses, and tires. With respect to the agriculture, do you have any network with the Ministry of Agriculture that you could use some of this waste to recycle, use it perhaps as compost or mulch or so? Do you have any networking with the Ministry of Agriculture?
The majority of the what would be classified as agriculture, the bulk would be, as Sani said, from the quarry, which we would use as the cover. The agriculture department, they are also free, I guess, to come and utilize what we have as well. We have that working relationship with them where they can come and also use the material that we have if it's needed or requested as well.
What you're saying, the material is the soil? That's the material? But it's over 15,000 tons, you're saying you collect as waste. And
when the trucks come into the landfill via the weighbridge, it would be classified on the computer system. It falls within the agriculture bracket. So yeah, it will be classified as agriculture.
If I can add some clarity, Madam, when the waste comes into the landfill, the operators of the landfill or the person who is in charge on that day will place the waste in a particular category. But remember, the waste is coming in there, perhaps in a truck, and if they see the truck covered with tree trimmings, it might be classified as agricultural waste. And then those tree trimmings could be concrete, plastic, because the waste isn't segregated at source. So it's usually mixed waste. So they do a general kind of categorization and try to get it as close as possible to the various categories that they're supposed to put waste in. So the truck then enters an area that's designated for agricultural waste. And what the member was saying is that if you need to get some mulch, you are free to come to the landfill and go to that area where agricultural waste is deposited and collect it. They will permit you to collect it if you want to. But in most cases, it's contaminated and it's mixed, and you do a general categorization. So it's really a rough estimate of the waste that you are getting, given the system now in place. If the system facilitates segregation at source, and then you have a particular day where agricultural waste is collected, then you know it's pure agricultural waste. But it's really mixed waste, and they categorize it based on the volume where it tends to lean more to, if it's agricultural or domestic or that kind of thing.
Are you saying that perhaps the collection of the waste should be more structured?
Definitely, we can all agree on that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, unless there are any more questions, I will now move to that stage where we ask for closing statements, but I will go in a different order. So, Mrs. De Freitas, would you make a brief closing statement?
Well, Madam Chairman and members, I thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to share a little bit on ACE recycling and Caribbean battery recycling. We know that the efforts that we have made over the last 22 years, and for Caribbean battery the last 10 years, are large in the scope, but we are working towards doing more. And ACE Recycling is in the process of funding a first world recycling center here in Trinidad that will take into consideration Trinidad as well as Tobago. And so we're hoping that that would be funded soon and in place in the next 2 to 3 years, that we could deal with all solid waste recyclable commodities. So I thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sandy, would you make a brief closing statement?
Madam Chair, let me thank the committee for inviting us and for giving us this opportunity to inform and to also learn. Tobago's mantra for the last, since 2005 has been clean, green, safe, and serene. The clean speaks to the issue of how we manage our waste. And if I may say so myself, Tobago is probably one of the cleanest islands in the Caribbean as far as waste in the streets and waste throughout the general environment is concerned. We are not Eden, in that we do have our issues and our challenges, as Mr. Beckers would have said earlier about waste meeting our shores and so on. But we really try to do our best. We are limited by the legislation that governs us. We are limited because persons are not forced to segregate their waste. And we are limited by the technology that is available. But we do try our best with the limited resources that we have, with the antiquated laws under which we operate. And Tobago really wants to maintain its position as one of the better managed islands as far as waste management is concerned in the Caribbean. And we'll continue to do our best, and we're hoping that with the new legislation that we hope to be treating it soon, will give us the kind of authority to treat some of the issues that are now affecting us as far as waste management is concerned. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and to your team. Mr. Jacob, would you make a brief closing statement?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The issues we have here in Trinidad are not unsurmountable. There is a definite need for strengthening, institutional strengthening. There's need for facilities to manage waste, systems, procedures, of course, legislation, regulations, and to monitor these things. And existing facilities, there's a need to upgrade and to support. And I would look at a simple one, the landfill sites, for example. SWIMCOL has been doing a very good job, given the resources they have to do the job with. There's need for funding, probably by way of tipping fees, so that SWIMCOL would source the required cover material and the other infrastructure, monitoring wells, berms, security, etc., to manage their landfills properly. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended and made a contribution here today. It was extremely valuable to us, and certainly it will be useful for us when we produce our report to be laid in Parliament. I wish to thank the media and the attending and viewing and listening audience to this session. There being no other business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.